Yeah, morning guys. This is another re-upload of mine, mainly due to how I sounded in my previous version of this video, but I've decided to slowly go about updating my older videos, and I've got a few new ones lined up as well. And also, I do apologise for the background noise, it's chucking it with rain here today. So the nuts and bolts of this video is that Norman Mineta claims to have been in the White House bunker with Dick Cheney at around 9:20 that morning, which is 17 minutes before Flight 77 hit the Pentagon, and overheard a conversation between Cheney and a military aide clarifying that an order still stood. Now, Mineta and Lee Hamilton, who he's given his testimony to, are referring to that order as a shoot-down order. However, because Flight 77 ended up hitting the Pentagon, conspiracy theorists have for years claimed that it must have been a stand-down order. So this video is going to examine several areas of this claim. Firstly, that the conversation Mineta overheard was not to do with Flight 77 or the Pentagon. Secondly, photographic proof that Dick Cheney was not in the White House bunker at 9:20 that morning. Thirdly, evidence from air traffic control records and Secret Service logs that show exactly what Dick Cheney and this military aide were looking at. And finally, this video finishes with a further list of 10 reasons why Norman Mineta's testimony just doesn't line up with the facts. First, let's have a listen to what Norman Mineta said to Lee Hamilton at the 9/11 Commission hearings.
I wanted to focus just a moment on the Presidential Emergency Operating Center. You were there for a good part of the day. I think you were there with the Vice President. And we had that order given, I think it was by the President, that authorized the shooting down of commercial aircraft that were suspected to be controlled by terrorists. Were you there when that order was given?
No, I was not. I was made aware of it during the time that the airplane coming in to the Pentagon. There was a young man who would come in and say to the Vice President, the plane is 50 miles out. The plane is 30 miles out. And when it got down to the plane is 10 miles out, the young man also said to the Vice President, do the orders still stand? And the Vice President turned and whipped his neck around and said, of course the orders still stand. Have you heard anything to the contrary? Well, at the time I didn't know what all that meant. And
the flight you're referring to is the
flight that came into the Pentagon.
Yeah.
Okay, so as we've heard, Mineta is testifying that he is in the White House bunker, the PEOC, with Cheney getting readouts from the FAA about an aircraft that's 50 miles, 30 miles, etc., and that Cheney has clarified to a military aide that the order still stood. Again, Mineta and Lee Hamilton are talking about this being a shoot-down order. Let's listen to another interview where Mineta gives even more detail.
Went down to the car and we went over to the White House. And as we went in West Executive Drive, people pouring out of the executive office building, people running out of the White House. And I said to my driver and security guy, is there something wrong with this picture? We're driving in and everybody else is running away. So I went into the White House and someone said, you have to be briefed by Dick Clark in the Situation Room. So I went in there, talked to me for 4 or 5 minutes, and he said, you've got to go to the PEOC. And I said, what's the PEOC? He said, that's the Presidential Emergency Operations Center. I said, I don't know where that is or what it is. And there was a Secret Service agent standing there. He says, I'll take you. Well, it's that bunker that's way under the White House. Some young man came in and said to the Vice President, there's a plane 50 miles out coming towards D.C. So I said, Monty Belger, who's the number 2 at FAA, I said, Monty, what do you have on radar on this plane coming in? He said, well, the transponder's been turned off, so we don't know who it is, and we don't know the altitude or speed. And so I said, well, where is it? He said, well, it's somewhere beyond Great Falls right now. And so then the young man came in and said, it's 20 miles away. And so I'd say, well, Monty, where is this plane in relationship to the ground? And radar, it's hard to associate with a ground point, but they'd be able to tell you roughly the distance from wherever you are. But he couldn't tell you speed or altitude. And then all of a sudden, as I was talking to him, he said, "Oh, I lost the bogey, lost the target." I said, "Well, where is it?" He said, "Well, somewhere between Roslyn and National Airport." And about that time, someone broke into the conversation. Said, "Mr. Secretary, we just had a confirmation from a Arlington County police officer saying that he saw an American Airlines plane go into the Pentagon."
Okay, so this one gives us quite a bit more information. There's some extra stuff in there which we'll touch on later, but the key things are that Mineta is getting distances and locations of a target heading towards DC by a man at the FAA named Monty Belger. So now we're going to plot these points onto Google Maps and see exactly what Monty Belger and Norman Mineta were talking about.
Some young man came in and said to the vice president, "There's a plane 50 miles out coming towards DC." So I said, "Monty Belger." I said, "Well, where is it?" He said, "Well, somewhere beyond Great Falls right now." And so then the young man came in and said, "It's 20 miles away." And so I'd say, "Well, Monty, where is this plane in relationship to the ground?" He said, "Well, somewhere between Roslyn and National Airport."
Now, in another interview that Mineta gave to MSNBC in 2002, he also states Monty describes the target as following the DRA, or the downriver approach, to Reagan National Airport. So if we put all 4 points onto this map, we've got Reagan National right next door to the Pentagon. We've got Great Falls to the north, the downriver approach, and Roslyn. Now, if we overlay the approximate flight path of Flight 77 onto this, it makes it very apparent that what Monty Belger was describing to Norman Mineta was not the approach of Flight 77. The flight path and these 4 points do not match up at all. So what was Belger describing to Mineta? Well, it may surprise you to learn what he was actually passing on to Mineta was the projected flight path of United 93. To help explain this further, this is an FAA personnel statement form filled out by an air traffic controller who worked at the Cleveland Air Route Traffic Control Center named Linda Justice. She filled this out and signed it on September 12, 2001. In it, she describes how she placed a projected flight path of United 93 going all the way to DC to assist with estimating in its location and arrival time to anyone ahead. Quote, "We were given a data block to which to track United 93. The aircraft appeared to be heading towards Washington Center airspace. In an attempt to expedite the situation, I put a change of routing in to reflect Hagerstown Airport to Reagan National Airport. This was only to forward the information to the sectors the aircraft appeared to be tracking towards." So effectively, she put into the air traffic system a change of flight plan for United 93 that took it from Hagerstown to Reagan National. And this projected flight plan shows up in the air traffic controller's screens called the traffic situation display. The TSD basically gives the same information as radar, and it's designed to update those targets with real radar inputs, but doesn't necessarily have to. If there's no radar data available, the target just moves or coasts based on the last known speed and direction. So let's plot these points on a map. Hagerstown in the north and Reagan National to the south. Here's the projected flight path that Linda Justice has put into the air traffic control system. Now, if we bring up our map from before and we overlay this new projected flight path, it lines up almost perfectly with the points that Monty Belger was passing on to Mineta. It's now very clear to see that the approaching target Mineta was testifying about had to be the projected flight path of Flight 93 and not the approach of Flight 77 into the Pentagon. And we can back this up even further. In order for Mineta to have been in the White House bunker for the approach of American 77 when it was, quote, 50 miles out, he would have needed to been in the bunker before 9:20. We can show that Mineta's timeline that he was recalling was in fact off by almost an hour. The problem with this timeline is it doesn't match up with anything else we know about that morning. Here on the screen is a Secret Service log for that morning. It contains a pretty good timeline for the approach of American 77. Starting at 9:25, open line with the FAA. 9:27, FAA advises 2 aircraft unaccounted for. 9:30, FAA advises one of the aircraft unaccounted for is approaching Washington DC, not communicating with the tower. 9:31, FAA advises the aircraft is 30 miles out. 9:34, aircraft is 10 miles out. 9:35, unidentified aircraft turns south. 9:36, unidentified aircraft circles to the west. 9:37, VP for Vice President, which is when Dick Cheney is told to start moving for the White House bunker. And 9:38, aircraft has crashed into Pentagon. Now, in order for Mineta's timeline to be correct, all this would have to have happened while himself, Cheney, and the military aide were all in the White House bunker. The problem here is the White House photographer's photos from that morning were released in 2015, and they show Cheney was still in his office during this entire event. Here's a photo taken at 9:31 of Cheney in his office in the White House watching Bush's speech in Sarasota, Florida. Here's another at 9:34. And the third one is taken at 9:36, and in fact you can zoom in on the TV and timestamp the ABC footage from that morning next to it and clearly see the time in the bottom right corner of the TV has 9:36 on it. This means that at this stage, just 1 minute prior to the impact of Flight 77 into the Pentagon, Cheney was not in the White House bunker with Mineta. Mineta had not yet arrived at the White House. And this entire conversation that Mineta heard between Cheney and the military aide in the PEOC had not yet happened. Mineta also gives some other clues.
Then the young man came in and said, it's 20 miles away. And then all of a sudden, as I was talking to him, he said, oh, I lost the bogey, lost the target. I said, well, where is it? He said, well, somewhere between Roslyn and National Airport. And about that time, someone broke into the conversation. Said, Mr. Secretary, we just had a confirmation from a Arlington County police officer saying that he saw an American Airlines plane go into the Pentagon.
So Mineta says 1 minute he's getting told that the aircraft is still north of the Pentagon, up by Roslyn. Then the next second, someone comes in and notifies them all that a police officer confirms he saw an aircraft hit the Pentagon. Now, I'm sorry, but the transfer of information like that is not instantaneous. For actual confirmation, which is the words he uses, to come via the Arlington police all the way to Cheney in a White House bunker would take a while, when you think about how many steps that message has to pass through before it's delivered to the people who would then go and tell Cheney. Clearly the Pentagon had been hit for some time already while this conversation between Mineta and Monty Belger was happening. Mineta also says he arrives at the White House after it began evacuating.
And as we went in West Executive Drive, people pouring out of the executive office building, people running out of the White House.
There were people running out of the White House. People were pouring out of the executive office building. This is a very well-stated timeline and an accurate description of what happened after the Pentagon was hit. The Pentagon was hit at 9:37. The evacuation of the White House did not occur until 9:45 that morning. That puts Mineta's arrival at the White House sometime after that. So again, Mineta cannot have been in the White House bunker at 9:20 that morning. We also know that sometime after 10 a.m. a shoot-down order was issued for Flight 93 as it approached Washington, D.C. This shoot-down order was given to fighters out of Andrews Air Force Base, scrambled under the authority of the Secret Service. They rushed towards the expected arrival of Flight 93, but of course found nothing. This same projected approach also caused panic on the ground, and people began to hear that there was another hijacked aircraft coming in, and they started to evacuate areas from around the Pentagon and around the Capitol.
White House, evacuate the Capitol, evacuate what is left of the Pentagon, and evacuate most every federal building across the United States.
Let's go! Gotta move! Get back, get back. You got another plane 20 miles out and they're evacuating everybody. hijack that's going in. That's what they said.
Report of another hijacked airplane coming in, a minimum of 500 yards from the Pentagon.
That aircraft was the projected arrival of Flight 93. What the Secret Service didn't realise at the stage was that Flight 93 had already crashed almost 30 minutes prior. This was the order that stood, a shoot-down order for the projected arrival of Flight 93. Mineta did not overhear a stand-down order. Mineta was not in the bunker with Cheney for the arrival of Flight 77, because Cheney himself wasn't in the bunker for it either. Anyway, to finish this video off, I'm going to bullet point all these reasons, including a few that I haven't touched on in this video, but are still relevant to explaining exactly how far off Mineta's timeline was. Number one, which I've already explained, the reporting points given by Monty Belger at the FAA do not match the arrival of Flight 77, but they do, however, match the projected arrival of Flight 93. Number two, Mineta's timeline is incorrect. He claims he was there at 9:20 in the bunker with Cheney, but the White House photos show that Cheney was still in his office at 9:36. Number three, the Secret Service logs show that Cheney was first told to start moving for the White House bunker at 9:36. They also show that the earliest they could have known about Flight 77 was when it was 30 miles out. Now remember, Norman Mineta's testimony said he was told the target was 50 miles out, but they didn't know about American 77 when it was 50 miles out. They did, however, know about United 93's projected arrival when it was 50 miles out, again reinforcing the fact that Mineta is getting these two confused. Number four, Mineta arrived at the White House after it began evacuating, and as stated before, the White House evacuation occurred at 9:45, 8 minutes after the Pentagon was hit. Again, this means Mineta wasn't in the bunker for the arrival of Flight 77. Number five, Cheney's timeline shows him taking a call from Bush in the tunnel while he was on the way to the bunker before he goes in. Now, Bush called from Air Force One. His timeline is very well followed that morning. He didn't get to Air Force One until after 9:42 that morning. Again, this was before Cheney went into the bunker, meaning he was not in the bunker for the arrival of American 77. Number six, Mineta gave an interview to 9/11 Truth Seattle and stated that the Vice President's wife was already in the bunker when he arrived.
And I believe you said yes to that.
Well, I don't know about being comfortable in the PEOC, but you know,
But he was there.
He was there, yeah.
And 9:20,
And so was Mrs. Cheney.
They were both there.
And there were other staff there in the PEOC.
Again, this is a timeline which is very well stated. She did not get to the White House bunker until after 9:50 that morning, which means Mineta did not arrive until after the Pentagon was hit. Number seven, in fact, the Secret Service shelter logs show Mineta's arrival at 10:07 that morning, which, based on everything we know, makes significantly better sense than Mineta arriving before 9:20. Number eight, Monty Belger states he never talked to Mineta about Flight 77. And in fact, number nine, others Mineta talked to that morning say that Mineta never talked to them until after Flight 93 had crashed at 10:04 that morning. Number 10, which is quite a big one, there were no fighter jets at 9:20 over or near Washington DC that morning. There was nothing to carry out a shoot-down order or a stand-down order. The closest fighters had been scrambled from Langley at 9:24. They were still 100 miles away. It makes zero sense at 9:20 that morning for Cheney to be asking for a shoot-down or a stand-down. In fact, Cheney doesn't even have the authority to authorize a shoot-down. He ended up relaying a shoot-down order from President Bush given later that morning, but that didn't come until after 10:30 that morning. Again, a shoot-down or stand-down at 9:20 just doesn't add up. There were no fighters in the area to carry out a shoot-down or a stand-down at 9:20 in the morning. And no, there aren't anti-aircraft missile systems at the Pentagon. Reagan National Airport is right next door to the Pentagon, and airliners take off and land on one of its main runways, which lines up exactly with the Pentagon every day, all day. Anyway, that's this one redone. I hope you guys enjoyed this debunking. I will get around to redoing my other videos shortly. Cheers, guys.